我衷心的說聲喜歡你，那雙眼動人，笑聲不迷人。冷雨夜我在你身邊，盼望你會知，我知道我的心，你當初已改變，只讓你相處。可愛面容，還就算風華，像昨天你共我。
Good morning, guys. Today we are here for the Viltrox 135 f1.8 lab lens. You should have just watched the video that I shot with the 135 lab, 135 GM, as well as the 2070 G lens from Sony. Can you tell which is which? Right. Okay, let's start with the TLDR version of this. The 135 lab from Viltrox is actually large and heavy compared to the 135 GM. It is very well built and optically is quite similar to the 135 GM. Yes, for the price is actually quite surprising, except for one small point in which it's actually slightly better than the 135 GM. Look at the optical deep dive later for details. Alright, as it's customary, let's start with the gate photos. Alright, center at 200%. This is the 135 lab. This is the 135 GM. As you can see, the 135 GM, as shown here, is much sharper in the center. Now let's go to the corner. Let's try this corner. Okay. This is okay. Here we go. This is the 135 GM. This is the 135 lab. 135 GM, 135 lab. There isn't a lot of difference here, which is good for the 135 lab. Alright, next photo. Let's go to the center again. 200%. Again, this is the 135 GM. This is 135 lab. 135 GM. 135 lab. As you can see, the GM is sharper. So let's look at this. This is the GM. This is the lab. Slight difference in sharpness at 200%. Again, we are looking at not much difference in practical terms. Let's have a look at the distortion and the overall focal length of these two lenses. This is the lab. This is the GM. As you can see, it appears one of this is slightly shorter than the other. Okay, this is the GM. Is a slightly longer telephoto. The lab appears to be slightly shorter. And if I were to flip through both of them, I don't think you can say the distortion is higher on either one of them. Both look pretty good. Although, remember, if you were to compare it with the 30-year-old 135L, that has better distortion correction than either one of these two lenses. Okay, now let's look at another set of photos from a Zumba shoot for a Zumba instructor. Let's look at these two photos. They're shot within 5 minutes of each other. Okay, now let's switch to the indoor shoot for Zumba. Okay, this is the 135 lab on the left, 135 GM on the right. The 135 lab photo has a little bit of lighting, artificial lighting, applied by the video guy. I would say both look amazing. Let's look at another at 100%. On this photo, definitely the 135 GM is sharper, although it may be due to movement. Now, in these two photos, there's no blurriness possible in terms of movement because they were both posing practically stationary. As you can see, yep, the GM is a sharper lens, but not by much. And in terms of colors, I think both of them have reproduced the colors very, very well. Okay, let's start hunting for CA. This is the Viltrox. I don't detect any. Neither does the GM exhibit any. Now let's look at longitudinal CA instead of just normal CA, which means chromatic aberration, purple, or other kinds of fringing for out of focus areas. They normally appear near the leaves or the edges. Yeah, so the greens are still green. There's no visible purple haloing or fringing anywhere. These three are the Viltrox, and these three are the Sony. Let's look at these two photos. They are very similar distances, obviously taken slightly different times. Okay, on the right is the 135 GM. On the left is the 135 View Lab. Okay, CA around the hair? No. Now I'm talking about normal CA. Yep, they are both nearly perfect for that. If you were to squint and look really, really closely, there's a slight green ring around this. Whereas there's nothing on all the Viltroxes. Okay, this is the Sony on the right. The Viltrox on the left. That's a little bit more. But now we are looking at 300%. But whatever we see is whatever we see. So there's a little bit more longitudinal CA on the GM when compared to the Viltrox 135 Lab. Let's go off to a more difficult lighting condition. This is in a memorial concert for the Hong Kong band Beyond, held somewhere in a rather small room, but the lighting was amazing. Now, let's look at this strange shot that basically for testing purposes only. GM looks slightly sharper, but I wouldn't fault any of these two lenses for being bad. Now, here is Samantha, lead singer. Right, let's go to 100% for both. I think both shots look amazing. The lab appears to be slightly off in terms of eye tracking, but I would say that is to be expected. But you can see the hair is very, very sharp here. And without comparing them side by side, there's no way you will say which is a better photo among these two. Okay, now let's look at another photo. You'll notice that all these photos are affected by haze. There's a lot of haze. But different photos would obviously have different amounts of haze depending on the time it was taken. This is quite evident here. If you were to look at the black darker parts here, you can see the blue that's washing over all the darkest parts on this shot on the right, which is the 135 GM, and on the left is the 135 Lab. 135 Lab has obviously much less haze. So let's look at 200%. Yeah, here 135 Lab does look sharper, but the question would be, is that haze affecting it? But again, either way, both photos look amazing to me. Another sample, 135 GM on the left, 135 Lab on the right. Pretty great for both lenses. And this is actually my favorite shot from that shoot. Okay, let's talk about AF performance for the 135 Lab when compared to 135 GM. It's actually very good in most conditions that I've tested, except for sports. Now we are talking about sports, actual sports, 50 meters to 100 meters sprints, not just random people walking down an aisle or a corridor. That works fine in nearly any condition I've tested. In fact, it also works fine if you talk about very low light conditions in haze, as you have seen in concerts and all. So, okay, for sports, what happens is that I find that if you were to run at full frame rates on my A7 IV, it's actually at 10 frames per second on electronic shutter, the Viltrox cannot keep up when you set it on focus priority. That means it cannot guarantee a lock-on every 1/10 of a second. The GM can. The GM would get a consistent 10 frames per second, and the Viltrox can only achieve maybe 7 or 8 maximum. And while looking at the Viltrox photos from those bursts, I find that the in-focus rate is actually quite high initially. At closer inspection, what I found that is that the 135 GM was able to achieve 70 to 80% pinpoint focus accuracy on continuous tracking shots for sports, while the Viltrox can only achieve maybe 50 or 40%. So if that is what you're going to use it for, what am I talking about? If you're a sports photographer, you would get a GM anyway. You will not consider a third-party lens. And you probably won't be using A7 IV. Maybe as a second body, who knows? All right, let's talk about the minor niggles. Number one, the lens hood is very difficult to remove once in the storage position for the 135 Lab. I've practiced this for quite a while. I am able to remove it. But, but it still takes me about 5 to 10 seconds to do it. Okay, number two, if you were to look at the positioning of the click and declick buttons, they are easily knocked when you are mounting the lens or when you are removing the lens. The aperture ring is similar. It is easily knocked, and therefore it could change positions before shooting. Number three, this is touted as a good feature for the 135 Lab or Viltrox lenses for firmware updates. No doubt it's actually very convenient, but the problem is you have to open the rear lens cap every time you want to connect a USB cable, thus allowing dust and stuff, foreign objects, to fall into the back of the lens, and this is actually very deep. It's actually not easy to clean up anything from the inside here. Number four is actually related to number three. Now we start on the firmware updates. When you want to do a firmware update on the 135 Lab, you would have to connect a USB-C cable here, a PD power adapter here, and then use the mobile app to update the firmware through Bluetooth. That's the only way to do it, as far as I know. I followed the instructions in Viltrox's website, and that is wrong. That's plainly wrong. It actually tells you to connect it to your camera and then do the firmware update. It doesn't work for Sony cameras at all. So this is the only way. And when you do that, you have to open this maybe for 5 minutes. Be careful not to allow anything to fall in there when you do the firmware updates. Now number 5, the firmware update again. The firmware update requires the app, as I've said earlier. So you would first have to download the app from, I think, the Play Store. Yeah, Play Store or the Apple whatever store, okay? Then you would have to log in. But before you log in, you have to register, right? Registering an account on Viltrox's website is actually a nightmare. It took me about half an hour to an hour to get it done. And it would only work when I registered using my mobile. It wouldn't work on a desktop browser of any kind. Number 6, on the first outing with this lens, I connected this to my camera, and then the aperture ring wouldn't work. The aperture control on the camera wouldn't work. It took me removing the lens twice and then powering down the camera, reconnecting the lens before everything started working. But then it worked for all 3 weeks of the testing. Never failed after that. I had no idea what went wrong. Okay guys, I'm right downstairs from the local distributor, Viltrox Malaysia, or VPhoto. I have to return the lens soon, but I just remembered there are 2 things I didn't mention in the Niggles section, and I've already shot that 4 times. I'm not shooting it again. Okay, the first one is this. It makes a lot of noise when you shake it. It's common for linear motos, but this lens is particularly bad. Yeah. Another thing is the sound of the aperture ring. Click, 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 on. Click on. Can you hear that? Yeah, and that sound is really nasty. Plus, the clicks do not correspond to any number of stops. Not 1/3, not half, not nothing. It takes about 7 clicks to get to 1 stop. It's a bit odd. Another minor niggle. So there are a total of, if I count correctly, 8 of them. And that's it. I'm returning this now. On to the rest of the video. Okay. Let's look at something fun. As in, really, really fun. Let's look at this, where I change lenses. Okay, this is actually a Viltrox photo. 135 lab here. But if you were to look closely, look at the metadata. It says Sony 135 GM. Why did I say it's the Viltrox? Let's look at the corresponding JPEG file. Lab. So the Viltrox has an issue where the raw files are labeled, probably labeling itself as a 135 GM on a A74, and on JPEGs it's saying, yeah, I'm a Viltrox. So, to buy or not to buy? Let's face it, the main reason that most people would be considering the 135 Lab is that it's very reasonable price. I think right now it's close to 3,000 ringgit, which is okay, unbelievable to me anyway. It's very good value for money. First thing that we have to know. Next one, there are compromises and niggles that I've spoken about. If you are to buy this lens, please make sure that you are ready to accept those and to live with them. But of course, let's look at the plus side. Optically, it is nearly as good as the 135 GM in most aspects, and it's actually better in terms of longitudinal CA on the Viltrox. Again, surprising, yep. Autofocus, nearly as good, except for actual sports photography. And what else is there? Okay, now, there is a third lens that is missing here. The Samyang 135 f1.8. That lens honestly doesn't have a very good reputation in terms of autofocus, I mean. Optically, it's actually known to be nearly as good as the 135 GM. It is around 770 grams according to Samyang's website. and this lens is 1.3 kilos, so it's actually like 500 to 600 grams lighter. Size-wise, it's nearly the same. So if you are going to consider this lens, I would advise have a look at the Samyang first as well. Do a comparison. The price is quite similar. You may want to compromise a bit on the autofocus performance on the Samyang for a lighter lens to carry around, or you want the autofocus, which is actually very, very good for nearly anything, and you would like to carry a 1.3 kilo lens around. So that would end my video. As usual, like it if you like it. I would definitely appreciate that if you were to subscribe to my channel. This lens took a lot of time to test. In fact, I think I've done the most thorough testing that I've ever done on any lens, even more than my professional work. Nobody's paying me to do this. This is going back to Viltrox Malaysia / VPhoto today. All I get is to make a video and to post on YouTube. And yeah. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down at the comment section. I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.